You know, have you ever seen a building that looks like it wasn't built but grown? Something so wild, so fantastical, it feels like it just landed here from another planet? If you have, you're probably looking at the work of Antoni Gaudí. His stuff is just not like anything else on Earth.
I mean, just look at this. This is the inside of his masterpiece, the Sagrada Familia. It's not just a church, it's a literal forest carved out of stone. See how those columns branch out at the top? Gaudí designed them to be just like trees, reaching for the sunlight, creating this incredible canopy that filters the light. You feel like you're standing in something that's alive.
So that's the big question, right? How on earth did one guy, in a single lifetime, invent a whole new visual language, a style that is so completely and totally his own?
Well, to really get it, we can't just look at the buildings. We got to get inside his head. And we're going to do that by unlocking the three great passions that really drove every single thing he did. So, what are these three keys? First, his obsession with nature's blueprint. Second, his deep, unshakable religious faith. And third, his fierce pride in his Catalan identity. Now, these things weren't just separate parts of his life. They were all tangled up together, creating the master plan for all his work. Let's dig into that first one.
Okay, so Gaudí was convinced that the natural world held all the secrets to perfect design. But, and this is the important part, he wasn't just trying to copy what a flower or a shell looked like. No, he wanted to understand the engineering behind it all, the structural logic that made them both so strong and so beautiful.
And you can really see what he was thinking in this quote. He looked at these massive, famous Gothic cathedrals, the ones with those big flying buttresses, and he saw them as flawed. He called them a defective body held up on crutches. Ouch. He thought they were fighting against gravity, instead of working with it.
So what did he do? He basically tossed out the history books and went back to the source. He studied how a tree supports its branches, how a human skeleton is built, the perfect spiral of a snail shell. He realized nature had already solved all the hardest engineering problems for him. And this is pure genius. This isn't some weird chandelier. It's actually a model for a church, but it's upside down. What Gaudí did was hang these chains with little bags of birdshot to simulate the weight. The chains would naturally hang in these perfect arches, these catenary curves. Then he'd just take a photograph of it and flip it upside down, and boom, there was the perfect, self-supporting structure for his church. He let gravity design it for him. It's absolutely brilliant. His love for nature even showed up in his materials. He came up with this technique called trencadís, which means broken in Catalan. It was this totally new way to cover those crazy curved surfaces with vibrant color, which was almost impossible to do with regular square tiles. And because he was using discarded pieces of ceramic, he was basically inventing artistic recycling, decades before anyone was talking about that stuff.
And you can see trencadís in all its glory right here. This is the famous salamander at Park Güell. There's no way you could cover a shape like this with normal tiles. But with trencadís, Gaudí could wrap any organic form in this shimmering skin of color, making his creations feel like they were really alive.
All right, so the second key to unlocking Gaudí's mind is his faith. As he got older, his Catholicism went from being just a part of his life to being the absolute center of it. It wasn't just his profession anymore. It became his one and only mission. And his devotion was total. People started calling him God's architect, and he really took that to heart. He didn't see his work as a job. He saw it as a sacred duty. For him, the Sagrada Familia was literally a prayer made of stone, a spiritual beacon for the Catalan people he loved so much.
Now, this intense devotion was fueled by a really terrible string of personal tragedies. In just a few short years, he lost his niece who lived with him, then his closest collaborator, then a dear friend, and finally, his biggest patron. His entire world was just collapsing around him.
And this heartbreaking quote, it just says it all. After all that loss, Gaudí pretty much vanished from public life. He actually moved into his workshop at the Sagrada Familia site and just poured every last bit of himself into what he called his Cathedral of the Poor.
So all of this personal loss really shaped the last part of his life, and it turned him into this fascinating man of contradictions, where all those driving forces, his faith, his identity, his love of nature, all came crashing together.
I mean, just look at the contrast here. As a young man, Gaudí was a total dandy. We're talking expensive suits, fine dining, a bustling social life. But the older Gaudí, the guy who built the Sagrada Familia, the complete opposite. He barely ate, wore the same shabby suit for years, and basically became a recluse.
And this transformation actually led to his death in a really tragic way. In 1926, when he was 73,
he was hit by a tram. But because he was dressed in these ragged old clothes and had no ID on him, taxi drivers literally refused to take him to a hospital. They thought he was a beggar who couldn't pay the fare. By the time someone finally recognized him, it was just too late.
But despite that tragic end, his impact is just undeniable. The world absolutely recognizes his genius. An incredible 7 of his works are designated as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. 7. That really tells you how unique and important his vision was.
And here's what I think is so amazing about his legacy. Gaudí never wrote any books. He never taught at a university. He never started a school of architecture. And yet, his radical vision, this fusion of nature and engineering and art, has inspired some of the most famous architects of the last 100 years. His work just speaks for itself. So, we end up right back where we started, with his great unfinished masterpiece. He gave 43 years of his life to it, and he knew he'd never live to see it finished. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the ultimate mark of genius a perfectly completed project, or is it a vision so immense, so grand, that it has to outlive its own creator?